After all that has just now been related to you, my boy, you can now be given that information, thanks to which there might be crystallized in your mentation data for the representation into what general form the results of the tenacious, impartial, conscious labors of these saints, the twin brothers, the terrestrial great scientists, were then molded in this China. And in addition, also, data for the representation concerning the degrees of the successive deterioration of being reason in the presences of these unfortunate terrestrial three-brained beings. And so, when for the second time from my observation of the existence of these three-brained beings who have taken your fancy, there arose on this still quite young China, thanks to the mentioned two great terrestrial scientists, the twin brothers, an independent branch of genuine science. That is, the totality of the information concerning the special question thoroughly cognized by perfected reason, of three-brained beings who had existed earlier, in the given case concerning the fundamental cosmic law of the sacred Heptaparaparshinokh, then called the Law of Ninefoldness. Then this branch of science was not only handed down almost normally in an unchanged form from generation to generation during the first 2 or 3 centuries, counting from the time of the sacred Ras Kawarno of the great twin brothers, but it even gradually became, thanks to their followers, also genuine learned beings of that period, as it is said, detailized, and became accessible to the perception of even ordinary beings. This proceeded, then, chiefly because the practice which had been established by the learned beings of the continent Atlantis, of handing down such information to the beings of subsequent generations only through beings who were genuine initiates, still continued among them. I must not fail, my boy, to remark and acknowledge with conviction that indeed if such an already long-established practice had continued, though automatically in the process of the existence of these unfortunate three-brained beings who have taken your fancy, then in the given case, just such a totality of true information already thoroughly cognized by the reason of their still relatively normal ancestors might have remained intact, and might also have become the possession of your contemporary favorites. And those of them who constantly strive not to become ultimate victims of the consequences of the, for them, accursed organ kundabuffer, might take advantage of this information with the aim of easing their already almost impossible what is called inner struggle. To the regret of all more or less conscious, relatively independent, separate individuals of our great megalocosmos, and to the misfortune of all subsequent three-brained beings who arose on this ill-fated planet of yours, during the mentioned period, namely, during 2 or 3 of their centuries, the gradual distortion and ultimate almost total destruction began of just that blessing which had been created for them by their great ancestors, thanks to their conscious labors and intentional sufferings. This followed from 2 causes. The first cause was that thanks to the same abnormal conditions of external being existence established by them themselves, certain of them were formed into responsible beings with that special organic psychic need, which in their speech might be formulated thus: an irresistible thirst to be considered as learned by beings around them similar to themselves. And such an psycho-organic need began to engender in them that strange inherency about which I have many times spoken, and which is called by them cunning wiseacring. By the way, my boy, bear in mind once for all that when I used and will use the expression learned beings of new formation, I refer and will refer to those of your favorites, the learned beings just mentioned by me, who have this specific inherency. The other cause was that thanks at that period to certain external circumstances not depending on them, and which ensue from common cosmic processes, chiefly owing to the action of the law of Suliunensius, the being data crystallized in them which engendered the impulses of what are called sensing and foreseeing, began to weaken in the common presences of the genuine initiated beings, and they began to take such newly formed types as I have just described, and to initiate them into some of the totalities of the true information known to them alone, among which was also that totality I mentioned. And from that time on, this branch of genuine knowledge, which had already at that time become the possession of most of them, gradually began to be distorted, and was ultimately again nearly quite forgotten. I employed the word almost when I referred to the ultimate almost total destruction of that blessing, because some fragments from the whole totality of this, in the objective sense, important true information nevertheless, began after the lapse of the mentioned period there, when their relatively normal process of being existence was again reestablished, to be again handed down to subsequent generations, exclusively only through genuine initiates, and being handed down by succession from generation to generation, reached unchanged even to your contemporary favorites, though to a very limited number of them. There remained, however, as the possession of most of your contemporary favorites from all this true knowledge which had already been attained and thoroughly cognized by their great remote ancestors, those several practical unimportant fragments which had automatically reached them, and which in the mentioned confused period were very widely spread among most of the ordinary beings of this then still quite young China. Among those unimportant fragments which automatically reached most of the contemporary favorites of yours, there are, firstly, several methods of separating from the Polormodectian product named opium certain of its independent active elements. Secondly, what is called the law of combination of colors. And thirdly, what is called the seven-toned scale of sound. As regards the first of the enumerated three fragments of the practical results attained by the reason of three-brained beings of this ancient China, and which reached to your contemporary favorites, it is necessary to tell you that in consequence of the fact that certain of the constituent parts of this whole product called their opium became from then on, thanks to the special properties of their agreeable action on the abnormal general psyche of the beings, to be continuously used by them. Therefore, the knowledge of many methods of getting certain of its independent active elements began to be transmitted from generation to generation, and reached down to your contemporary favorites. And at the present time, they also obtain many of its definite parts, and use them very avidly for the satisfaction of always the same consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer crystallized in them. These parts, extracted by them from the general composition of this Polormodectian product, have of course already other names among your contemporary favorites. A contemporary comical learned chemist, a certain Mendeleev, even collected the names of all those active elements now obtained and classified them, as it were, according to their atomic weights.